try to get the exam done before Thanksgiving so that you're not thinking about it over Thanksgiving. I have done it both ways, and obviously you can study over Thanksgiving, but no one really wants to do that over Thanksgiving. So I think it's actually best to have the exam before Thanksgiving. So we're going to get it done, get it over with. You'll still be working on your ID project, so I'm not letting you totally off the hook, but it's nice to have a little break. That means that we have to finish all of the unit system today and Thursday. Today, I have kind of a plan of how much I want to get through. We're going to finish innate immunity and start adaptive immunity, and I want to get through antibodies. On Thursday, we're going to finish adaptive immunity and talk about hepatitis C. So that's, at least in my head, that's where I'm hoping we're going to be at the end of today, is through antibodies and adaptive immunity. Because this really takes time too, so just kind of looking at what I have there. Yes?
So we don't have disease of the day today?
So we're not going to do disease of the day today because I want to get through antibodies. If I'm going to cut something out of an exam, I'd rather cut one of the diseases out than adaptive immunity. So I'm thinking a little strategically. I don't always know from semester to semester how long it's going to take to get through stuff because it depends on the kinds of questions people are asking. And so I try to, over time I'm getting better at doing that, but I never get it perfect. So my goal is to get through everything without rushing, because I don't like to rush through stuff because it's not good for you. I want you to feel free to take time to ask questions. All right, so I will fiddle with my coloration while you do a clicker question here. These are some clicker questions from last time. What? It's going to be hard. Hard to. Nobody breathe. All right. Which of the following is the first line of defense? So we're answering this question. I know there's more of you than 40 in here, but in the interest of time, you guys said, yes, definitely the skin is the best answer there. Everything else on here is other lines of defense. All right, which cell type is the first to respond to the site of inflammation? Okay, last chance to click in. At least 30 seconds there. Okay. All right, so most of you say neutrophils. That's actually the correct answer. And so I've worded this a little differently than we worded it in class. We talked about the first to respond to the site of infection, but inflammation usually goes hand in hand with infection, and we're going to talk about inflammation today. So neutrophils are usually the first responders. So a question like that would still be in the sense that it's sort of asking that first responder question. Which cell type differentiates into macrophages and dendritic cells? All right. A chance to click in. Okay, this is just a memorizing question. So you need to know that monocytes differentiate into macrophages and dendritic cells. When you go to professional school, the vast majority of you will actually have to take immunology and learn this at even a deeper level. So none of this is useless info. You're going to need it again. Okay, where would I find a PAM? associated molecular pattern. So the way you remember that is it's pathogen associated, right? So what's the pathogen? It's the bacteria. All right, the pathogen associated molecular pattern. Before I finish what I was about to say, no. So going back to this, if the question said where would I find a toll-like receptor, what would the answer be? Would be a phagocyte, right? So remember, a pathogen-associated molecular pattern is on the bacteria, and the toll-like receptor is on the phagocyte. And when the pathogen gets near the phagocyte, the toll-like receptor binds to the PAM, and that helps induce the phagocytosis. All right? There's a lot of studying to do for immunology. It's a lot going on. Okay, so if you didn't remember that, that's okay. This was a chance for us to review it, and hopefully just going through things over and over is how you memorize things. Okay, a couple study guide questions here, and again, we're not going to go into these in a lot of depth, but one of the study guide questions says, in what ways is a phagocyte a tiny container of disinfectants? How might you answer this?
Shoots up the
Yeah.
You talked about the process of phagocytosis and how when is it phagolysosome?
The phagosome fuses with the lysosome to form the phagolysosome.
Yeah.
What's in the lysosome?
lysine.
Not lysine, although I can see why you would say that. Lysine's an amino acid. It's bleach, proteases, nucleases, radical, oxygen, free radicals, so oxygen species, radicalized oxygen. I don't think that's actually a term people use. But oxygen free radicals, right? So really reactive, really damaging molecules that are going to kill bacteria. So when you think about the phagocyte, the lysosome inside the phagocyte really contains what we would consider a whole bunch of disinfectants, bacteria-killing molecules, so that when an organism gets inside the phagosome and fuses with the lysosome is designed to destroy that bacteria. Okay? What do PAMP and TLR stand for? So we just did this, pathogen-associated molecular pattern. And what was this one? Toll-like receptors, right? So the toll-like receptors are on the
Phagocyte.
on the phagocyte. You guys are not inspiring confidence here. Toll-like receptors are on the?
Phagocyte.
That's what, way better. Okay, Chrome, later. All right, what is the role of PAMP and toll-like receptors in phagocytosis? So we were just talking about it with the quicker question, right?
Pass.
Toll-like receptor recognizes the PAMP and induces phagocytosis.
So bacteria has the pathogen-associated molecular patterns, things like peptidoglycan, for example, that your body, from an evolutionary perspective, recognizes are bacteria-like. It has toll-like receptors on the phagocyte, and that binding of the toll-like receptor to the pathogen-associated molecular patterns is what triggers phagocytosis. Okay? So you want to be able to explain it like that. Why is the evasion of phagocytosis a type of virulence factor?
Just allows the pathogen to last longer.
Because the pathogen gets out of being destroyed by your white blood cell, right? So that's exactly right. So it's a virulence factor. That's a way for them to survive. We talked about the different steps of an infection, and one of the steps of an infection was, evading the immune system. And so evading phagocytosis is a major way, one of the major ways that some of the more nasty pathogens evade your immune system. And when I say more nasty pathogens, I mean, things like the bacterium that causes tuberculosis, for example. Okay, so the study guide questions are hopefully going to help you revisit some of these processes and think about them a little bit more. So we were still talking about the innate immune system. What does innate mean?
Built in.
You're born with it, right? And it's ready to go. It doesn't take any time for your innate immune system to kick in and get going. So your innate immune system, in addition to phagocytosis, which is one process, your innate immune system also has another process called inflammation. And we've all had inflammation of one kind or another. Inflammation can be triggered by injury. So for example, you can injure your knee or your ankle and have it be swollen. And that's a non-infectious inflammation. and it happens all the time. So processes are the same, you have tissue damage, the same cells are involved. Or you can have inflammation as a result of bacteria being present. If you have inflammation, acute inflammation, which is the kind we're going to focus on, you probably have things like redness, pain, heat, and swelling. Your book calls it rubor, dolor, calor, and what was that one? Tumor, right? The Latin terms for fluid, right? Buildup causing the swelling. And so usually inflammation, the kinds that we're going to focus on, usually it's short in duration. So it's there for a few days and goes away. There's also chronic inflammation. So we talk a lot about, you'll hear a lot about chronic inflammation now, because we're starting to think that it's an important role in many disease processes, particularly diseases like lifestyle diseases, cardiovascular disease. They're starting to think of underlying sort of low levels of inflammation in the cardiovascular system being part of heart disease. It's a non-infectious disease that's kind of out of our specific focus. But inflammation, chronic inflammation, is that in the brain? Is that associated with Alzheimer's disease? Some people think so. So the idea there is that you have some of these inflammatory molecules that are present at low levels and kind of doing some damage to systems over time. Okay, so, but we're going to focus on acute inflammation.
I was just going to ask, do you, from what you know, like does turmeric or whatever actually help with inflammation?
My mom bought me some turmeric the other day, and I was like, "Where's the data, Mom?" And she's like, "I never should have sent my children to college." So is there evidence on turmeric? No. Not good evidence. I mean, I think it's being studied, though. I've certainly heard that, but I haven't seen anything that maybe I'm still sitting in my cupboard. Because she won't take it. She just leaves it in my house like detritus in the cupboard. So, so I have a bottle of turmeric if anyone wants some. Yeah. So the answer is I haven't seen any good data. That doesn't mean that good data doesn't exist, and that doesn't mean that next year at this time I won't be talking about it as having lots of evidence on it, because things change all the time, and that's definitely something that people are studying. Yeah. Does it hurt to take it? Probably not. Again, your back's hurting, your wall's heavy. Yeah.
Makes good curry.
It's good in, I think it's good in recipes, absolutely, yeah. I think, here's another thing too, if it is healthy, eating as a nutrient in your food is probably just as good as taking a pill with more of it, yeah. Anyways, but no, I have not seen convincing data yet. Okay, so inflammation. All right, so we're going to focus on short-term inflammation. There are some forms of long-term inflammation. So TB, for example, you can wall off the mycobacteria, little granulomas, so that would be an infectious disease that has sort of more of a chronic inflammation. But it's not like years and years. It's still going to be a couple years at the most kind of thing, and then usually people do either get sick or they seem to clear it. All right, so what causes not chronic, we're focusing on short-term acute inflammation. So any kind of traumatic event in the tissue, so something like a splinter, the idea here is that it's mobilizing and attracting pieces of the immune system to the site of the injury. If you have an infection, then one of the jobs of the immune system is going to be to kill any infectious agents that are there, try to prevent them from getting into your body more systemically. Let's say all you've done is twist your ankle. Well, you've done some tissue damage. The cells that have been ripped apart and damaged have, they basically communicated to your immune system that damage has been done. Your immune system's going to go, and cells like neutrophils have been shown to be involved in actually cleaning up the damage. So they're going to clear out the debris, and over a few days the swelling should go down, and hopefully the damage will repair itself unless you've done something like tear your ACL and need surgery. So sometimes the swelling goes down but the body isn't fully repaired. That's when you need an orthopedist. Okay. So I have in the next few slides a chart, and of course whenever I give you charts like this, I don't expect you to memorize everything that's on them. But what I did want to point out, and the reason I actually took the time to put it in here, what I did want to point out is we've been talking about cells, so we've been talking about macrophages and dendritic cells and neutrophils, and we're going to talk a lot about B cells and T cells. But there's also a lot of molecules that are involved in the immune system. And these molecules are mediators of both inflammation but also other activities of the immune system. And so some of these I would like to have had you here, even if you're not going to memorize them for this class because you may be asked to memorize them later on. So tumor necrosis factor is actually a really important one. It causes fevers to happen. It's with blood coagulation. It is secreted by macrophages and other white blood cells, and it actually increases chemotaxis and phagocytosis. So it's sort of a stimulant of the immune system. Does that make sense? So when cells secrete TNF-alpha, and a lot of times it's an immune cell that's secreting it, this is going to kind of put the immune system in hyperdrive. Have you heard of rheumatoid arthritis, where people get kind of swelling of their joints? So that particular disease used to be really hard to treat. But there are now really good drugs. So I want you to harken back to our PGLOW discussion about making molecules that, are in bacteria, making protein therapeutics in bacteria. So we now can give people injections of an antibody against TNF-alpha that actually can make that it's chronic. They still have to get these treatments regularly, but basically it binds up the TNF-alpha, it reduces their immune system, it cools their immune system off, and now people with rheumatoid arthritis, it's been life-changing for people with rheumatoid arthritis. So instead of being crippled by it, they can lead pretty much a normal life as long as they keep the TNF-alpha levels down. So your immune system, mostly I think I talk about it and I'm just in awe of how amazing it is and how it keeps us healthy, but it can overdo it. The immune system can overdo it a bit. So tumor necrosis factor is one that's really important to know about. Interferons are molecules that are produced by leukocytes that we're going to talk about a little bit more in a few minutes that you need to know about because they help us survive viral infections. Interleukins are important when we talk about adaptive immunity. There are ways for white blood cells to talk to each other. So interleukin, they're basically molecules that communicate between white blood cells. Does that make sense? Interleukin, kind of a cool name, right? And then there are cytokines. So these particular molecules are also, they can activate specific immune responses. So depending on the different cytokine, there's hundreds of these, right? So unless you're going to become an infectious disease doc, you don't necessarily need to memorize all of them. There's molecules that are like vasoactive mediators, so we're going to talk about these in a minute. Histamine, serotonin, bradykinin are all important in inflammation. Histamine is one that causes your blood vessels to dilate. It allows fluids and cells to go to the site of injury. But bradykinin and serotonin, particularly bradykinin, they actually have the opposite effect on your respiratory tract. And so what happens, I think histamine too. So what happens is, even though it dilates your blood vessels, it causes the smooth muscle in your respiratory tract to constrict. And so someone with a severe immune response that's producing a lot of these inflammatory mediators can start to have trouble breathing. So we talk about a severe allergic reaction. It's caused by the release of these molecules. I realize this is, maybe I've dropped it one too many times. Okay. All right, and then there's other molecules that we'll also not memorize, but just know about when we talk about differentiation of sort of a naive T cell into a mature T cell. These interleukins actually drive those responses. Prostaglandins are another one that has the constriction of the bronchioles in inflammation. So just knowing that there's molecules that are involved in these processes.
I have a question about the
Yeah.
rheumatoid arthritis.
Yeah.
So when they inject them, are they injecting them with like a bacteria that inhibits that?
No. So we use the bacteria in big fermentation tanks. So we go to Genentech. They probably make this. I don't know if Genentech makes this one. They probably do. But they have big fermentation tanks they grow bacteria in. The bacteria have plasmids that have the molecule, have the antibody, the human antibody, that have that antibody, that they're making human antibodies. Bacteria don't want to make human antibodies. That's us telling them to do it using genetic engineering. And then what happens is the bacteria are basically processed. So all of the bacteria die, but we isolate the antibody away from all the other bacterial molecules, sterilize it and put it into vials, and then people who need it can inject it. So all they're getting is antibody. We're just using the bacteria to build the antibody because they have ribosomes and protein synthesis machinery, and it's a lot cheaper to have a bacteria do it than try to make these antibodies in a machine in a lab with lots of harsh chemicals and things like that. Actually, way safer to have bacteria do it. Okay, if you're interested in those processes, that's what genetic engineering is, and that's what careers in that field do. Just something else to do with a general interest in this kind of information. Okay, so inflammation is part of this innate immune system. We're still in the second line of defense, so obviously things are getting in, right? Here's a knife with some bacteria on it, and it's breaking the skin, breaking that epidermal layer, getting into the dermis. And so now your body has bacteria that are inside it that it needs to deal with. So let's talk about the stages of inflammation and the molecules that are involved. Okay, so the knife has been removed, which is good. And now your damaged tissue is going to cause the release of histamines, prostaglandins, leukotrienes, and so these are the molecules that are represented by the blue dots. And there should be bacteria here, although I don't, bacteria, the orange thing. So the bacteria should be way bigger than the blue dots, right? Because bacteria are much bigger than molecules, but you get the idea. One of the first things that's going to happen is a blood clot's going to form, because if that doesn't happen, you're just going to be bleeding. That's no good. So unless you have hemophilia, you should be okay there. And then what happens is, because there were bacteria on this knife, and they got into under your skin, a little abscess is unfortunately for this person forming. And so basically what you have is all of these mediators are basically signaling to white blood cells like neutrophils, come here, we're injured, we have bacteria, come save us. And so all these bacteria are basically, all the white blood cells are coming in, and they're going to start taking over and killing the bacteria and cleaning up the damaged tissue, but that's going to result in a little pocket of pus from all the neutrophils that are there. All right, so what's happening here? Well, here are our neutrophils. I don't see any monocytes here, but both, well, there's a neutrophil, and there's monocytes. Okay, they're both here. So here's our little blood cell. It's in the finger, right? We see our bacteria that have gotten in. And so what's going to happen is these blood cells, these white blood cells, as they travel through the bloodstream, they're hearing the call from these chemicals, the chemicals, help, SOS. With the histamines and the leukotrienes and phosphate, they're all saying, help, help, come save us. And so the white blood cells say, oh, I hear the message, I need to leave the blood vessel and go out to the tissue and kill bacteria. And so what they do is they do something called margination. They stick to the endothelial layer of the white blood cells, and then they squeeze in between these endothelial cells to get into the tissue. So that process is called diathedesis. And once they're into the tissues, remember that monocytes differentiate into macrophages and dendritic cells. So you can see our monocyte suddenly looks really different here, right? Because it's developed all of these, and the dendritic cells look even more sort of dendrites, right? And then you have your neutrophil that's also gotten through, and so they're going to eat up all these bacteria, which you want them to do, right? The other thing is the macrophage is going to be, remember we talked about the macrophages and dendritic cells don't just eat up the bacteria, but they put the head on the stake and stick it out on their surface. So they're chopping up the bacteria and putting its parts out, because they're going to train your adaptive immune system that there's bad bacteria present that your immune system needs to respond to. So that's going to be more that we're going to talk about a lot on Tuesday. Okay, so we had, just going back, we had the knife came out, we formed a blood clot, lots of these cytokines and mediators of inflammation are getting produced. That results in dilation of the blood vessels and these cells migrating from the blood to the tissue. And we talked about the process of the migration out to the tissue. All right, and the good news is this person's going to live. The white cells did their job. After they're done, they die off. They're not needed anymore. A scab is formed. Eventually, the skin will repair itself and heal. And all of the damaged tissue has been either repaired or destroyed and cleaned up. The neutrophils have cleaned up the mess. So this probably happens to you every day with a little infected hair follicle, maybe a little pimple. Hopefully not lots of major problems, right? But often this is really common. If you ever get a little hangnail that's a little inflamed, that's happening every time, okay? Questions on inflammation? Yes?
I think this is a little off topic, but it was like, so if you ever get like an abscess that like kind of lingers, is that just like the process continuing, or is there a reason why it's kind of like
It's just not healing because the infection was so bad.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and then you just need to have it drained and cleaned out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think there are cases, most of the time they're little, right? And even a pimple that can be fairly significant will eventually usually heal on its own. But if someone's injecting drugs and they have dirty needles and they get a lot of bacteria in their body, they can end up with an abscess that's, you know, we feel that, you know, it might be okay, eventually the body might clear it, but the problem is that it's also possible for those bacteria to escape into your bloodstream. And so we don't want to allow that to happen. Now in nature, if an animal is in a fight and it gets an abscess, it either eventually clears the bacteria or it dies of a septic infection, right? And that's what would happen to us too. So a lot of times we will treat things like strep throat, for example. We treat things because we can, and the chances that it could stay with you and do damage are actually fairly high, but there's a fairly good chance you'd fight it off too. So I would say a larger abscess, the doctor's going to make a judgment call. On a pimple, he might say, that's going to heal, but on a big abscess in your arm, you might say, well, that's a risk of causing, of you dying from it, so we're going to, this one will drain for you, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, we talked about strep throat, and we said, I'll get the quicker question going. And then we talked about strep throat, and we said, you know, why do we treat strep throat? Wouldn't you fight it off eventually? You know, you might, but we worry about rheumatic fever because we know that strep can actually cause the development of these antibodies that then attack your connective tissue. So sometimes we treat things not because we think the person's going to die of the infection, but because we know that, you know, the path that you can end up on a path that where you're not very healthy.
Yeah.
From other problems, you know, why do we treat bladder infections? Well, they can cause kidney infections. Those can be life-threatening. Would your body eventually clear the bladder infection? Yeah, you know, people used to get bladder infections before they were antibiotics. They didn't all die from them. But we treat them because of potential consequences down the road. That's helpful or not. Okay, inflammation and phagocytosis are non-specific functions that are part of which line of defense? First, second, or third? You guys said, servant said. Oh, I hit the wrong button. Okay. You guys said second, right? Okay, let's do the next one. All right, actually I don't have the next one. Study guide question. Describe how, I have to stop this. Describe how cells in the bloodstream are recruited and moved to the site of inflammation. So this is basically just looking back at this inflammation process, right? And I'm looking for you to say, you know, that injured cells, infected cells are going to send out chemical signals in the form of interleukins and chemokines, cytokines, and these are going to cause, you know, the blood vessel to dilate. The histamine will cause blood vessels to dilate. That's going to cause things like neutrophils and monocytes are going to be attracted to the chemicals released by the damaged tissue, by the damaged cells. They're going to move into the tissue. And then they're going to be available to clean up damaged cells, to eat bacteria, etc. I actually covered this, right? So we talked about TNF-alpha being a molecule in the immune system that has kind of broad effects on inflammation that makes your immune system more sensitive. It's going to stimulate inflammatory processes. We know that rheumatoid arthritis is a sort of an unnecessary level of inflammation in the joints. So it's not doing you any, it's not there for a good reason, it's really an overreaction of your immune system. So by lowering the concentration of TNF-alpha, by giving people antibodies against TNF-alpha, that binds up the TNF-alpha and removes it from circulation. And so basically lowers it, dampens your immune response, so it'll reduce swelling in the joints. Yes? Okay. Questions on that? Okay. Another process that's part of the innate immune system is fever. Just thinking about your body, your hypothalamus is a part of your brain that is sort of the thermostat. So at home you might set your thermostat, normally let's say you like it to be 70 degrees. So you set your thermostat to 70 degrees. That's your normal temperature. One of the things that happens when you get an infection is that pathogens really like your normal body temperature. Just like you like your house at 70 degrees, pathogens really like 98.6, which is Fahrenheit or 37 Celsius. They think that's a really nice temperature. So when your temperature starts to go up, it actually impedes the growth of many viruses and slows down the growth of bacteria. And by slowing down the growth of bacteria or replication of viruses, you actually give your immune system a little bit more of a time. They're not growing and dividing as rapidly. Your immune system has a little bit more of a chance to get the infection under control. And so by raising the temperature, it actually stimulates some of your immune cells. Things like T cells are going to speed up. They're going to divide more quickly. They're going to be more active. And it's going to increase some of these molecules like interferon and tissue repair by the cells. So while it makes you feel bad when you have a fever, it kind of makes you ache and slow down and not want to move around, it actually kicks your immune system into high gear, at the same time suppressing bacteria and viral growth. And so fever is good up to a point. So how does this work? Well, pyrogens are molecules like some cytokines that cause your thermostat to get turned up, your internal thermostat. So if you're feeling cold, you might turn the thermostat up. You might say, wow, 70 isn't warm enough today. I think I want it to be 74. You could go and dial up your thermostat. And what would happen when you dialed up your thermostat? The heat would come on, right? All right, so the heat comes on and your house gets warmer. Well, that's what these molecules do to your brain. They dial up the thermostat. So your brain says, oh, we need to be hotter. We're not warm enough. And so it goes past your normal set point of 98.6, and it turns it up. So maybe now your temperature is set to 100 degrees, and your body warms up. So your body burns more calories. You might shiver, so that you get some of the muscles vibrating a little bit to produce more heat. You'll be stimulated to want to put a coat on because you're cold, because your body's trying to raise the temperature. Does this make sense? Okay, so have you heard of fever breaking? When your fever breaks, or you take aspirin, now what's happened is your body, your temperature, the thermostat's turned back down. Just like you would turn it down, when you turn the thermostat off, the heater goes off, right? And it stays off as long as the house is warmer than the thermostat. And that's what happens with your body. When you take aspirin, or if you just get better and your fever breaks, your set point is going down. Now your body tries to cool itself off because your body heat is higher than the thermostat. So you'll start to sweat because your body's trying to cool itself back to where your thermostat is set at. Yeah.
So do ibuprofen and Tylenol inhibit pyrogens?
Yeah, that's a really good question. At least in terms of pain, it's not actually well understood how they work. I'm actually not sure if it inhibits pyrogens or if it just has an effect on the immune system that results in that. So that's a good question, and it's possible that the answer is known and I just don't know it. So it's certainly something we could look up. But sometimes these molecules, we know they work, but not necessarily how. People have been taking aspirin, does a great job lowering your thermostat.